Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, and I am here today to do my Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading and any bookish things that have gone on. Had a bit of a slow start to the reading week. We'll get to the actual Friday Reads portion of this video in a little bit, but I did finish one book and I am almost done with a second one, and I am about, I think, halfway through a third. So we'll talk about all of those in a little bit. And the book that I finished is going to be one of my favorite reads of the year, so I'm really excited to talk to you about it when we get to the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. The first thing I wanted to quickly mention is, in my last video I had mentioned that we were going to be going to the Celtic Games here in Montana. We did. That is actually where I got this shirt that I am wearing. It says Guinness, and I'm not actually a huge fan of Guinness, the alcohol, but we had named my dog Guinness, the one that we lost in June, because he is black and tan. Welsh Terriers are black and tan. So how could I pass up this shirt? We looked for Jameson shirts because my other dog, we called her Jamie, but her name is Jameson, and couldn't find any, which is interesting because Jameson is also Irish, but couldn't find it. Anyway, we had a fun time. I got this nice shirt with Guinness's name on it, so that is nice. And Jamie actually just wandered into the room, although you can't see her. It is National Dog Day as I'm filming this, so I just posted something nice about her on Instagram, and she's just staring at me. It was a good time. Our favorite thing there is really just the caber toss. So they had it again this year. We hadn't been because of the pandemic, and it was all outside, so it still felt relatively safe to attend, and that was good. If you don't know what a caber toss is, I will put a video here of one of the best that we saw, one of the fails, and maybe a slow-mo one, just because slow-mo is fun. So enjoy. It is so much fun to watch. And actually, Jamie is in her little dog bed on the side of my desk. I'll put a photo of that up here so you can see that as well. So that's all the stuff that has been going on here. The other thing I wanted to mention is that recently on Twitter, I did a poll where people could sort of choose what my next audiobook was going to be. The options were Less is Lost by Andrew Sean Greer and Babysitter by Joyce Carol Oates. Both of them are upcoming books and things that I had advance access to, so I felt like I need to read them. And obviously the winner was Less is Lost because I talked about that in last week's Friday Reads video, which will be linked in the description box down below. And I did a whole rant review of it, which will let you know that I didn't like it very much, and that will also be down below. I wanted to mention that really quickly, one, because I tend not to do votes on what my next read is going to be, so that was kind of a fun, different thing to do. But I wanted to also bring this up to talk a little bit about Joyce Carol Oates, because I included her in there because she is a notable author. I've mentioned that since she has this book coming out, Babysitter, she is a potential fit for the Pulitzer Prize next year. I'm always looking ahead to that kind of thing. And Joyce Carol Oates, I have referred to as the Susan Lucci of the Pulitzer Prize. She's been a finalist several times and has not won. And she's getting up there in years. So it does feel like inevitably she will be coming to the end of her career, even though she has been extremely prolific. So I feel like I'm always on the watch for that. I have not really enjoyed most of her writing. I did like the first book of hers that I ever read, which was Blackwater. It is a novella, and it is inspired by the story of Mary Jo Kopechne. If you don't know who that is, she is the woman who was in a car with Ted Kennedy leaving a party. He crashed into the water, and he escaped, but she was trapped in the car. And instead of going for help, he got back to the house and called the family lawyer instead of the police, and she drowned. So in the novella, a woman leaves the home of a prominent family, and they are in an accident. She thinks he has gone for help while she is trapped in the car, but the water keeps rising. It's a very bleak book, but it's well done, I think. I have not had so much success with the other books of hers that I've read. I was intrigued by a book, Zombie, which is not one that most people talk about. It was inspired by Jeffrey Dahmer, and I really didn't like it. I just did not think it was well done. And then I did a buddy read of Blonde, her book about Marilyn Monroe. Both Blackwater and Blonde were among her Pulitzer Prize finalists. And neither Britta nor I liked Blonde at all. We ended up bailing about halfway through the book. And I feel like I just have problems with her a bit, which is kind of harsh because that experience that I had reading Blackwater was really great, and then everything I've read since then I haven't really enjoyed. And her work is kind of deliberately prickly and feels like it's almost lacking in compassion in some ways. And maybe I haven't tried some of the right books, so I keep thinking that I might want to keep trying her and keep going. And that's where the interest in Babysitter came from, but also because of the Pulitzer Prize angle. However, she also is someone who has said some problematic things over the years, and I feel like you always want to give someone the benefit of the doubt. I did that for years with the most prominent example of this. You want to believe, oh, they just misspoke, they didn't really mean it like that, but it just keeps happening with Joyce Carol Oates. The most recent one is that she said, related the story of a friend of hers who said that he is not even looking at manuscripts that come from white male authors, and bemoaning the fact that the publishing industry is no longer going to allow white men, but it's still dominated by white men. So it's just the latest in a long line of things. So I've been kind of struggling with where I stand on her. And I have decided reviews on Babysitter have been kind of mixed. I think this is probably going to end up being my last ditch attempt at trying a Joyce Carol Oates book, because at this point I haven't had great experiences with her books. Like 2 out of 3 have not been great experiences. And I also am starting to feel a little squeamish about her as a person. So I think this is going to be my last ditch attempt to try a Joyce Carol Oates book. I don't feel any need to prioritize it anymore, even though, because it's coming out, I think, like next week. And I'm going to get to it when I get to it this year if possible, but I am not going to hurry. So if I get to it, it's probably going to be my last ditch attempt at her work. But if you have thoughts on Joyce Carol Oates, I would be very curious, because I'm still very much up in the air. I really don't like a lot of the things that she has said. And I feel like when people tell you who they are repeatedly, you need to listen to them. So that's what I'm sort of struggling with in terms of that. Let me know what you think of Joyce Carol Oates, if you've read any of her books that you recommend. Like I said, I think Blonde is an interesting book, and I had a lot to say about it last year. Now I have a little bit enough distance that I don't quite remember what all of my complaints about it were, but it felt like it is a book that is about how much Marilyn Monroe was othered, but it seems extremely harsh and judgmental and critical of her as well. It doesn't seem to like her at all, and yet it also wants you to sympathize with her, and I felt like it was wildly tonally jarring in that regard. So anyway, that's my quick little thing on Joyce Carol Oates and where I'm at with that. And I wanted to mention it because I had made that part of the poll, and occasionally I will get questions like, oh, are you going to get around to that one? So my plan is, I'm not going to hurry to get to Babysitter, but I'm not closed off to the idea. But I think if I do get to it, it's going to be sort of like 3 strikes and you're out. That would be the 3rd strike after Zombie and Blonde, on top of all of the things that she says that are unpalatable in her Twitter account. She is one of those people who, someone on her team either should have taken over her Twitter account at some point, or they should have said, you know what, we're gonna just shut this down. Let's not pay attention to Twitter, because it doesn't feel like it does her any good to be on that platform, to be honest. Anyway, I wanted to mention 2 other things really quickly. I'm not going to include this in like a book haul, but I wanted to shout it out. I'm a little bit obsessed with the show Come From Away at this point. I read the book The Day the World Came to Town talked about it recently, and then we went to Spokane to see the touring version of Come From Away. Really loved it. So after we got back, called Montana Book Company and ordered the book about the show. We didn't get it when we were there, obviously, and then afterward we were talking about it and decided we just wanted it. So this actually has the text of the musical, kind of like a script with photos of it. But what really appealed to us about it is that it also has a lot of behind the scenes stuff about the making of the show, which is interesting. But the thing that really inspired us was that it has a lot of stuff about the background, like the actual story of Gander, and photos about what happened. And if you're unfamiliar, Come From Away and the book The Day the World Came to Town are about Gander, Newfoundland, and how after 9/11 a lot of planes were diverted to the airport there and were stuck there for days while U.S. airspace was shut down. And the people of Gander and the surrounding towns really rose to the occasion and just did wonderful things to take care of the plain people, as they called them. And I loved The Day the World Came to Town, and I loved Come From Away. And you can tell Jamie has gotten up and is barking now. It is what it is. So I'm not going to include this in a book haul, but I wanted to mention it here really quickly because I think there were a lot of other people who were really excited about the show as well. And then the other thing before we get to the actual Friday reads, so I did my book haul for August, which was a unique book haul for me. One, because it was a little smaller, and two, because I've read most of the books that were in it already. In it, I talked about Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. I found a copy of this at my local used bookstore, totally by chance. And it was in that sort of library plastic. For some reason, my local used bookstore always wraps new release hardcovers in library plastic. I don't know why. They only do it with the new releases. I honestly could not tell you why they do it, but they do. And they had put the price tag right here, and it was under the plastic, so I couldn't get it off. Well, Jen, the librarian, trust a librarian, commented, just basically told me how to get it off. You had to remove the jacket completely, and then you could make a slit along the bottom between the jacket and the plastic, and then just slide the dust jacket out without damaging it at all. And it worked. And I'm really excited that I don't have to stare at the price sticker anymore, and that it's not this shiny plastic that is kind of unnecessary. So thank you to Jen, and thank you librarians for continuing to help people in need. And the other thing I really wanted to mention is that there has been so much good feedback about this on that book haul, which again will be linked down below, that I'm kind of thinking that this might be my next physical book. It is obviously longlisted for the Booker Prize as well. We'll have to wait and see if it makes it onto the shortlist, although that is coming, I think September 6th. So not this coming week, but the week after, we will find out what makes it to the shortlist. And I'm really hoping, based on the feedback, that this does make it. And I have other thoughts about this book's awards prospects going forward. And as part of that, I would love to actually read it. So once I finish my current book, I'm thinking that this will be the next one that I pick up. All right, so let's get into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video, because I'm really excited to talk to you about the book that I finished. It's Night of the Living Res by Morgan Talty. This is a collection of linked stories. I did not actually know that the stories were linked when I picked it up. All I knew about it was that it is a short story collection set within the Penobscot Nation in Maine, and it is obviously about Native American characters, and Morgan Talty is part of that community. So it just really piqued my attention. And Morgan Talty did an interview with NPR's book podcast, which is called Book of the Day, and that really caught my interest. The audio of it is on Scribd, so I added it and decided to dive into it. Actually, the reason I decided to dive into this audio is that I was looking at my Montana Book Company reading challenge for the year and what prompts I need to finish in order to be done with it for the year. And one of them is that I need to read a book by an Indigenous author. So I thought that really is what drove me to pick this book up now. And I'm really glad that I did, because I loved it. I loved it so much. I finished the audio Wednesday night. Thursday morning, as soon as they opened, I called Montana Book Company and ordered a copy. They had it in stock, so it's just in the mail on its way to me right now. that's how much I liked it. I want to have it on my shelves. I kind of want to, sometimes you finish a book on audio and you want to be able to spend time with the words on the page, and this is definitely one of those books for me. Interestingly, it is a little bleak in parts. There are like trigger warnings all over. It deals with abuse, sort of generational trauma, poverty and economic insecurity. It deals with mental illness and injury and addiction, both alcohol and opioids and things like that. The protagonist is a character named David. And that is one of the things, because it is linked stories. Every story is narrated by David, and the stories are all from different points of his life. You sort of move around as he gets older and then jump back to stories from when he was a little younger. And it basically is about his friends and his family and him. And it is such an interesting book. The characters are so vivid, and everything that happens in it, it can be a little bit heartbreaking. But the thing that I really love about it is that even though it can be heartbreaking, it can be bleak and grim and all of those things, it also has this really deep well of tenderness and almost hope in it. And that really made me feel almost emotional. It kind of reminds me of my experience to Shuggie Bain, because Shuggie Bain is obviously a very bleak book if you know anything about it, but it also has a sort of palpable love for the characters, and it almost feels optimistic from that perspective. And Night of the Living Res is very similar to me. It is very much about serious subject matter, and it ultimately reflects what it is like to be part of the Native American community in the modern world, and the challenges that you face and the joys and the difficulties. It's a really great book. I think this is now going to be up there with The Secret Lives of Church Ladies as a book that I would love to champion to have more people to read. My beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, and now my beloved Night of the Living Res. I have a bad track record with my Pulitzer Prize hopefuls, because just look at my beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies and The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, and you'll see evidence of that. But I think this would actually be a great book to put in that conversation, because it says a lot about American life, which the Pulitzer is intended to hopefully deal with. And it's just a beautifully written book that deals with a good topic. And I also really love that we are finally getting more Native American authors and Native American stories out there. For such a long time, the conversation was dominated by Louise Erdrich and Sherman Alexie, and that was it. In the beginning, it was really Sherman Alexie, and that has really sort of switched. Now it's definitely Louise Erdrich. And part of that is definitely that Sherman Alexie has some Me Too complaints against him. But I think a lot of people have also started to recognize the quality of the work that Louise Erdrich had been putting in for decades before she won a Pulitzer Prize recently. And I'm so glad that there are more of these stories and authors getting out there. And this is definitely a great example of it. And I haven't read some of the other potential contenders, Nightcrawling being one of them. And I don't want to get into it now, but I think Nightcrawling's chances for the Pulitzer could potentially be complicated by the Booker Prize. As I said, it is on the long list. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But I think this is a book that should be in the conversation for the Pulitzer Prize, and I would definitely encourage people to look for it. As I said, the audio is on Scribd. If you are a member of that, that's how I listened to it. But I loved it so much that I wanted to get myself a copy for my shelves, and that I might even reread it. I liked it that much. And it's definitely going to be one of my favorite books of the year. I can't remember exactly where it is, but it's definitely on my list, and I hope that more people will discover it. It is in paperback as well, if that helps. It was released in paperback. So really loved this book and would definitely recommend it. And if you've read it, I'd love to hear what you thought of it in the comment section down below. The last 2 or 3 stories in it were like gut punches. I look forward to having a copy of the book that I can flip through. And if you can hear, the rooster is just going nonstop as it usually does. I apologize for the noise. It is what it is. But anyway, that's the book that I finished this week, and it was just absolutely spectacular. I've been working on The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. I got a very slow start to the reading week just because work was busy and there were a lot of other things going on, and I was sort of just taking my time working through some stuff. that didn't involve reading. So I dove back in, finished Night of the Living Res, and I had mentioned in my book haul, because this is a new book that I brought into my library this month, that I was halfway through. Well, I was wrong. I, for some reason, thought that this book was just over 200 pages, and it is instead almost 300 pages. So I was not actually halfway through the book when I did my book haul, and now I have about 100 pages left. I'm really loving this book. So the story behind it is that my niece is 13 years old, and she was not assigned specific summer reading. She just had to log things that she does read. So my sister and I have been sort of trying to encourage her to read some stuff over the summer. She used to be a big reader, but she hasn't been in recent years. So we're trying to help her sort of rediscover that. And she was very resistant to the idea. So we said, all right, well, if you pick a book, we will all read it together and do like a buddy read or like our own little tiny book club. And we had a hard time getting her to pick a book. She eventually chose The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. I was a little resistant at first. Not really. I didn't say this to them, but in my mind I was like, oh no. Because there was a cartoon movie version of this from like 1980 or 1982, and it kind of traumatized me as a kid because there's this harpy and there's a red bull and it scared me. So I haven't really thought about this. I vaguely knew that it was a book, but I hadn't really thought about it because of that like childhood trauma thing. But I'm not going to try to discourage her when she finally picked a book that she was interested in. So my sister actually sent me this from Northshire Bookstore in Vermont, which used to be my favorite bookstore. It's still a great bookstore. I just discovered Montana Book Company and like them better. It's a great store if you've ever been in the area. One thing doesn't matter to anybody, but the bookmark that I'm using right now is from Northshire. I have a stash of bookmarks right here on my desk, and I try to pick one that will fit for each book. And if I get a book from a particular store, I try to use that one. So it didn't come with a bookmark, but I have some from when I shopped there in the past. And it just so happens that their bookmark looks like a tapestry, and the cover of this book looks like a tapestry, and that thrills me to no end, even though it is so silly. So silly. So this was published in the 1960s. If you're unfamiliar, it's the story of a unicorn who has been living in a forest. Unicorns are very solitary creatures, and she overhears some hunters talking about how there are no unicorns left. So she ventures out. It's sort of your classic hero's quest to find out if she is in fact the last unicorn. And in her journey, she meets a wannabe magician named Schmendrick and a woman named Mottley Greer, and they go on, again, sort of a classic hero's quest. They find out that there is a red bull that has done something to the unicorns, and that it lives in the castle of a man named King Haggard. And the writing is pretty stunning. In my book haul, I read a little bit of the opening. I do that in all of my book hauls, but I just want to hit that here really quickly because it's a part of the book with no spoilers, but it just shows how beautifully written this is. Chapter 1, the unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived all alone. She was very old, though she did not know it, and she was no longer the careless color of sea foam, but rather the color of snow falling on a moonlit night. But her eyes were still clear and unwearied, and she still moved like a shadow on the sea. Beautifully written book. And what's fun about it as well is that it sort of plays with the conventions of this type of story and what you will expect. Like at one point, it mentions that there was a baby, and somebody says, well, I know the birth of a hero or the introduction of a hero character when I know it, and that's exactly what this was. So these people are almost on a meta level aware of the type of myth making and storytelling that goes into stories like this and all of the different plot contrivances. So they're kind of making fun of things as it goes through, but it's also just a beautifully written version of that story anyway. And I can't wait to finish it. So I'll talk more about it in my next Friday Reads because I will be done with it by then. And my sister and my niece are on vacation this week. So hopefully they'll be back and we can have a conversation about the book. So once I finished Night of the Living Res on audio, I turned to the audio of Stories from the Tenants Downstairs by Sidik Fofana. This is also something that was recently featured on NPR's Book of the Day podcast. It was a really interesting interview. So these are stories that are kind of about gentrification, but not directly, because as Sidik Fofana pointed out in his interview with Book of the Day, nobody who's like in a neighborhood like Harlem, which has been getting gentrified lately, like wakes up every day thinking about gentrification pushing in on them. They tend to think about all of the concerns of life that they already have. And people who are like white people who move into the neighborhood aren't doing it with the intention of gentrifying the neighborhood necessarily. So he's sort of reflecting what goes on with gentrification and the lives that are impacted by it without being heavy-handed. And so far, I have listened to the first 3 stories. I think there are 7 total. And it's very interesting. He also talked about how he wanted each character to sound different and have a different sort of voice and perspective, and that has been really interesting as well. And I am looking forward to finishing this book, so I will talk more about it when I finish it, after I finish it. So in my next Friday Reads video, or maybe in my August reading wrap-up, because God, we're coming up to the end of the month. Can you believe that? What is time? But I'm really enjoying this book so far as well. So it was not as successful of a reading week as it was in my last Friday Reads in terms of what I finished, but the quality of the things that I have read has been really good. And I would love to hear what you think about any of those things in the comment section down below. If you have recommendations, I'd love to hear what you've been reading and watching this week as well. I will leave it at that for this week. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I will be back. Until then, happy reading.